The room was chilled, not by the air conditioning, but by the arrogance dripping from every word Scott Bessent had just said. "We'll manage your gold better," he declared, standing in front of a polished mahogany table in the heart of Ouagadougou. Cameras rolled, translators paused, even the ceiling fan seemed to slow. Across from him, Ibrahim Traoré didn't flinch. He leaned forward, fingers interlaced, elbows planted. The pause before his answer was not hesitation, it was control. The kind that made empires nervous. "We don't need a keeper," Traoré said quietly, his voice landing like a steel blade wrapped in velvet. "We've kept ourselves for centuries. Even when you were taking more than you ever gave." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was loaded. Bessent chuckled, masking offense with a businessman's charm. "I'm talking about growth, development. Your mines are underproducing. Your infrastructure is ours," Traoré cut in. "So is the gold under it, and the soil above it, and the air around it." This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting. It was a clash of blueprints, one built on old colonial reflexes, the other on hard-earned sovereignty. What Bessent thought was a business pitch was, in Traoré's eyes, yet another masked attempt to take what wasn't his. Reporters in the room sensed it, the shift, the tension. One even whispered, "This isn't about mining, it's about control," and Traoré heard him. He turned slightly and said into the microphone, "This gold may be in the ground, but it's never been buried." That was his warning shot. The headlines the next morning would call it a firm exchange. But to those who understood the subtext, it was clear, something deeper had been unearthed, and it wasn't just mineral wealth. Scott Bessent didn't come to Burkina Faso to be embarrassed. His name carried weight in boardrooms across Wall Street. He'd advised presidents, managed billions. Yet here, in this sun-baked capital, he found himself being schooled by a man in a faded uniform who didn't blink. He shifted in his seat, trying to reclaim the room. "Ibrahim," Bessent began, forcing a grin, "I think you misunderstand. We're not here to take anything, we're offering partnership, technology, efficiency. Your people deserve better than outdated shafts and hand-dug pits." Traoré tilted his head. "Do they also deserve to be silent shareholders in their own land?" he asked. "Or should they be grateful while others turn our gold into skyscrapers in Manhattan?" Bessent's smile cracked. "We bring structure," he pushed back, "security, transparency. The market trusts us, and we don't trust your market," Traoré said. "Your rules always demand that we stay small. Your audits count what we produce, but never what we lose." Behind him, a young advisor placed a folder on the table. Quietly, strategically, Traoré opened it without looking down. Satellite data. Every ounce extracted without declaration. Every shipment rerouted through third-party ports. "We've been watching." Bessent blinked. This wasn't just a president talking. This was a soldier who had turned surveillance into sovereignty. The message was unmistakable. Burkina Faso was not asleep. It had been watching the watchers. "I came with a deal," Bessent said, voice lowered. "You came with a leash," Traoré replied. And with that, the mood shifted permanently. The offer on the table didn't just sour, it rotted. Outside, protesters gathered, not against Traoré, but in support. They carried signs not of nationalism, but ownership. One banner read, "No more keepers. We are the keepers." That evening, the confrontation made headlines around the world. Traoré defies Wall Street mogul. Gold diplomacy erupts in Ouagadougou. Africa says no, but back in the presidential compound, the storm had only just begun. "They're calling you reckless," said a regional advisor, handing Traoré a tablet. "Western outlets are spinning it, saying you're scaring away investment." Traoré skimmed the headlines and set the tablet down without a word. "Let them be afraid," he said. "Fear keeps thieves from returning." Meanwhile, in a luxury suite at the five-star Laco Hotel, Bessent was on the phone with Washington. "I'm telling you, he's closing the gates," Bessent said into the receiver. "We're about to lose access to half the Sahel's untapped reserves. And he's not bluffing." The voice on the other end, calm, American, powerful, sighed. "Then make him look unstable. Frame it as populism run wild." But the ground was shifting faster than PR could catch up. In Ghana, Mali, and even parts of South Africa, young leaders began reposting clips of the Traoré Bessent showdown. It wasn't just viral, it was seismic. Hashtags like #NotYourGold and #Burkinistan started trending. One particular clip, where Traoré calmly said, "We don't need a keeper," was edited with a slow-motion zoom and powerful background music. It hit 12 million views in 24 hours. Inside the compound, Traoré sat with elders from the mining regions. No cameras, no speeches, just listening. "We've dug these veins for generations," said an old man, hands calloused like dry stone. "Now they want to mine what's left of our dignity." Traoré stood. "They can have our silence when they bury us with it." The room stood with him. The next morning, Bessent received a formal letter stamped with the national seal. All foreign mining contracts would be temporarily suspended pending review. That wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration. Bessent paced his hotel suite like a man trying to outrun gravity. His assistant spoke from the corner, voice tight. "If the freeze holds, we lose $300 million in projected output by year-end. That's not just us. That's the board. That's the shareholders." He stopped pacing. Looked out the window. "Then we break the freeze," he muttered. "He wants a fight. He'll get it." Across the city, Traoré wasn't pacing. He was planning. In a closed-door meeting with representatives from Nigeria, Algeria, and Chad, he laid out his counteroffer: a regional mineral alliance, African-owned, African-run. No middlemen. No silent partners. A united bloc. "We've all had our gold polished into someone else's reflection," he said. "Now we forge a mirror of our own." Some leaders hesitated. "They'll call it resource nationalism," one said. "They already do," Traoré replied. "But this time, they'll call it from behind a locked gate." Back at the hotel, Bessent went on offense. He booked an exclusive interview with a major American news network. Live. Prime time. He's emotional. Short-sighted, Bessent told the camera. Burkina Faso can't handle the complexity of global markets alone. They need partners, responsible ones. The anchor nodded, then cut to the now viral footage of Traoré's response. "We've been handled long enough. Now we hold the reins." Social media exploded. He said what needed to be said. About time someone told them no. Bessent thinks gold means control. Traoré thinks it means freedom. But it wasn't just words anymore. That same night, a convoy of mining trucks was halted at the northern border. National Guard stood in formation. Licenses revoked. Cargo sealed. Bessent slammed the TV remote across the room. He had underestimated something far more dangerous than politics: conviction. And Traoré wasn't just holding his ground. He was redrawing the map. By the fifth day, it was no longer just a national standoff. It was continental. In Dakar, youth groups marched with placards reading, "Our gold, our rules." In Nairobi, university students staged sit-ins outside the offices of international mining conglomerates. Even in Paris, a protest flared outside a major bank holding stakes in West African extraction deals. Bessent watched it all unfold from behind tinted windows. "They're romanticizing chaos," he muttered. His aide disagreed. "No. They're recognizing sovereignty." But back in Ouagadougou, Traoré wasn't basking in public support, he was deep in negotiation. In the presidential situation room, a map of Africa glowed on the digital wall, pulsing with regions marked in gold, lithium, cobalt. Traoré stood before it like a general surveying terrain, not for war, but for reclamation. He pointed to the Sahel. "Here," he said. "We build the first Pan-African refining hub. Our engineers, our labor. No more shipping raw resources. No more selling value before we add it." An advisor raised a concern. The West will push back. They'll sanction. Undermine. Traoré didn't flinch. Let them. But they'll be punishing independence, and the world will know it. Meanwhile, Bessent tried a new strategy: division. He called a secret meeting with a former West African president, offering funding and influence to fracture the bloc Traoré was forming. But word got out. Leaked. And that night, Traoré addressed the nation. They send whispers into our halls to unseat us. But they forget, we are not seated by whispers. We are raised by will. The speech echoed across borders, translated into Swahili, Hausa, Arabic, and even French. People didn't just cheer, they listened. Because in a world built on stolen riches, one man had drawn a line. And behind him, a continent began to gather. Bessent's phone lit up at 3:17 a.m. They're nationalizing the Wahiguya field. He didn't answer. He already knew. Traoré had signed the decree before dawn, and by sunrise, security forces had assumed control of one of the most lucrative gold fields in the region. No shots fired. No noise. Just precision. At the UN, the American delegate raised the alarm. This sets a dangerous precedent. Investors won't tolerate unilateral seizures. Burkina Faso's envoy calmly replied. Investors tolerated centuries of unilateral extraction. Now they'll learn a new precedent: ownership. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré walked through a newly established facility. No velvet suits. No red carpet. Just dust, engineers, and welders in oil-stained overalls. These, he said, gesturing to the workers, are the custodians of our wealth. Not hedge fund managers. One technician approached him nervously, holding a gloved hand out. My mother used to say, we'd never see this day. Traoré gripped his hand firmly. Now it's our job to make sure your daughter never forgets it. Meanwhile, Bessent scrambled. His PR teams pushed op-eds in international papers painting Traoré as reckless, unstable. They leaked financial projections of an economic collapse in Burkina Faso. They flooded investor forums with doomsday threads. But something strange happened. The markets didn't crash. Instead, sovereign wealth funds in Asia began to take interest. South American leaders requested meetings. Even Gulf states reached out quietly to ask one question. What's his long game? Because what Traoré was doing wasn't just rebellion. It was strategy. And for the first time in decades, the story wasn't about an African country begging for investment. It was about a leader refusing it, unless it came on his terms. Scott Bessent hadn't built a billion-dollar empire by losing quietly. So when markets ignored his warnings, when the media narratives failed, and when investors began calling Traoré instead of him, he turned to something older than strategy. He turned to fear. Within days, a report emerged: Burkina Faso's gold reserves under threat of insurgency. Another followed: unrest in the Sahel, can Traoré control the chaos? The headlines weren't accidental. They were planted. CNN ran a panel questioning Traoré's stability. Bloomberg analyzed Burkina Faso's inexperience with sovereignty. Even a UK tabloid questioned his military background: can a man with a rifle run a refinery? But Traoré didn't blink. He called a live international press conference. Behind him stood miners, engineers, farmers, no military parade, no suits, just the nation. And in perfect English, he addressed the room. They don't fear instability. They manufacture it. They don't fear our weakness. They fear our discipline. And they don't fear what we have. They fear what we're about to build. It was no longer just rhetoric. It was doctrine. The video racked up 10 million views in 2 days. In New York, Bessent watched with clenched jaw as even financial journalists began to soften. One anchor remarked, "Whatever you think of him, you can't deny Traoré is leading something." And in Africa? It was wildfire. From Nigeria to Namibia, young entrepreneurs posted #OurGoldOurTerms. In Senegal, crowds painted murals of Traoré wielding a spade instead of a gun. And in Ghana, a university renamed its economics lecture hall. Salle d'honneur Ibrahim Traoré. Bessent had bet on fear. Traoré had bet on clarity. And one was losing faster than he could calculate. In a private boardroom overlooking Manhattan, Bessent leaned forward, fingers drumming the table. He's a soldier. He doesn't understand scale. But even as he spoke, his analysts showed him the numbers. The Wahiguya field had tripled output since nationalization. Supply chains were intact. Energy from solar grids. Smelting refineries staffed with trained locals. Costs down. Efficiency up. And then came the unthinkable. Burkina Faso announced it would begin trading gold in its own currency, backed by reserves, independent from the dollar. The room went silent. "No one will take it seriously," one advisor mumbled. "They already are," the economist replied. "Kenya, Brazil, Malaysia, they've signed bilateral trial agreements." Bessent slammed his fist down. "Get me Washington." But even in D.C., the mood was shifting. A congressional staffer briefed a private committee, "Traoré isn't just talking post-colonialism. He's building post-dollarism." Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré walked the floor of a minting facility. Gold bars, each stamped not with a foreign bank's emblem, but with a simple phrase. "Burkina Faso, not for sale." A young intern asked him, "Do you think they'll retaliate?" Traoré didn't hesitate. They already did. But this time, they met a nation that knows what it's worth. It wasn't defiance. It was calm confidence. The kind that couldn't be traded. Couldn't be sanctioned. Couldn't be bought. Because for the first time in decades, an African leader wasn't asking to sit at the table. He was carving a new one, out of solid gold. Scott Bessent knew how to win markets. But what Traoré was doing? It wasn't in any textbook. He wasn't just securing gold. He was turning sovereignty into currency. At a televised summit in Johannesburg, Bessent took the stage. The crowd was stiff. Reserved. Mostly Western investors, diplomats, and CEOs. "I'm not here to criticize local governance," Bessent began. "But I do worry when emotions replace strategy. Sentiment doesn't build systems." A polite ripple of applause followed. Then the moderator introduced a surprise guest. Traoré. He walked out in his signature fatigues, no tie, no translator, and no hesitation. He didn't sit. He stood next to Bessent. Shoulder to shoulder, and looked straight at the crowd. Emotion didn't build this. It was built with sweat, steel, and stone. "They told us we couldn't refine our gold. We did. They told us we'd beg for aid. We haven't. Now they say we're emotional. Let me tell you what emotion looks like. It's what they feel when a servant refuses to serve." The crowd shifted. Silence turned to stifled gasps. Bessent clenched his jaw, forcing a smile. He leaned into the mic. "You speak well, President Traoré. But gold is more than metal. It requires trust. Traoré turned to him. Then why do your hands shake when we hold it? The room erupted. Cameras flashed. News tickers exploded. One headline read. Traoré flips the script, Africa's gold, Africa's voice. Backstage, a reporter asked Traoré if he had a message for Western firms. He replied without pausing. Yes. Stop underestimating us. This isn't rebellion. It's responsibility. And in that moment, no one could deny it. The continent wasn't asking for a seat anymore. It was redesigning the floor plan. Weeks after the summit, the world hadn't moved on. Gold prices fluctuated. Markets reacted not to inflation or oil, but to Traoré's speeches. In Geneva, a panel whispered, "This isn't about Burkina Faso anymore." "No," a banker agreed. "It's about the end of default obedience." Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré stood at the foot of a new monument, a towering gold sculpture of a pickaxe breaking chains. Behind it, the National Mint buzzed with life. Young engineers ran systems. Elder miners trained the next generation. Wealth stayed, circulated, grew. Then came the moment no one expected. Scott Bessent requested a private visit. Not a summit. Not a broadcast. Just him and Traoré, in the room. Inside the presidential compound, Bessent removed his watch at security. No aides. No notes. Just a man stepping into someone else's world. Traoré was waiting, calm, unmoved. Bessent spoke first. "You proved a point. More than one. I underestimated you." Traoré didn't flinch. "I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was building." Bessent nodded slowly. "What's next?" Traoré smiled slightly. "Now, we stop mining for approval." He stood and extended his hand, not in surrender, not in partnership, but in closure. "You came here expecting to lead. You leave knowing we never needed one." Outside, a local boy watched the convoy roll out. He asked his grandfather, "Who was that man with the suit?" The old man smiled. "Someone who thought he owned the map. And met the man who redrew it." In a world where gold once flowed in only one direction, out, Traoré built a dam. Not of stone, but of purpose. Not to hoard, but to grow. Scott Bessent came with the voice of empire, dressed in politeness, cloaked in control. But he left with something heavier than gold, the realization that the old world no longer ruled the new. Traoré didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence weighed more than Bessent's billions. Because power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it looks like a nation refining its own gold. Sometimes, it sounds like a child asking, "Who owns the map now?" And maybe the most powerful answer is this: we draw it ourselves.